Ingrid Bergman owned up to it all in the letter she left behind. A letter which altered everything. On August 29, 1915, Ingrid was born in Stockholm, Sweden. She was the single child of Justus Bergman, a Swedish painter and photographer, and Friedel Adler Bergman, who was of German extraction. Tragedy hit her early in life when she lost her mother at the age of 2 and her father at 13. These early tragedies greatly influenced her personality, giving her a subtle strength, independence, and emotional depth which would later characterize her screen presence. Her childhood encouragement to perform in front of her father's camera led her into the enchantment of expressing herself, and under his camera's eye that she first caught sight of performance power. Upon finishing school in Sweden, Bergman studied at the Royal Dramatic Theatre School in Stockholm, the very same high-profile institution where Greta Garbo had learned. Already in her very first performances, she showed a remarkable capacity for expressing truth and vulnerability, and had audiences drawn strongly into her emotional world. Her big breakthrough happened in 1936 with the Swedish film Intermezzo, where her warmth and sincerity impressed both critics and audiences. The success of the film prompted Hollywood producer David O. Selznick to invite her to America and remake the movie in English. Bergman's Hollywood debut, Intermezzo, A Love Story, 1939, made her an overnight sensation. Her natural-looking freshness presented a jarring contrast to the heavily made-up, stylized vamps of the day, and audiences warmly welcomed her wholesomeness. During the 1940s, Ingrid Bergman was one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Her iconic performance as Ilse Lund in Casablanca, 1942, starring opposite Humphrey Bogart, anchored her place in movie history. With her radiant eyes and sorrowful stoicism, Bergman infused the tale of love, sacrifice, and war loss with heartbreaking realism. She followed this up with strong performances in For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1943, Gaslight, 1944, for which she won her first Academy Award for Best Actress, and The Bells of St. Mary's, 1945, in which she played a kind-hearted nun opposite Bing Crosby. Each performance demonstrated her skill in bringing depth and nuance to multifaceted emotions with poise and intelligence, and she became one of the most esteemed actresses of her time. During her time in Italy, Bergman worked with director Roberto Rossellini on a number of films, including Europe 51, 1952, and Journey to Italy, 1954. Although these movies were not successful at the box office when they came out, they would prove to be pioneering films of post-war cinema that prefigured the emotional alienation and existential quest that would become favorite themes among future directors. Following the collapse of her marriage to Rossellini, Bergman slowly re-established her career, and she returned to Hollywood in triumph with Anastasia, 1956, earning her second Academy Award. Her performance, as a lost woman fighting to regain her identity, was interpreted as a metaphor for her own redemption, and fans welcomed her back once again. Bergman went on to play in a diverse range of roles throughout Europe and America, collaborating with some of the finest directors of her time, including Alfred Hitchcock, Jean Renoir, George Cukor, and Ingmar Bergman, not related. Her more mature performances, especially in Autumn Sonata 1978, directed by Ingmar Bergman, demonstrated the complete maturity of her craft. There, she gave a profoundly affecting performance as a pianist dealing with her estranged daughter, a role that reflected her own complicated history as a mother. It brought her another Oscar nomination and solidified her reputation as one of the greatest actresses ever to appear on film. Ingrid Bergman's own life, as with her celebrated movie career, was filled with boundless passion, sophistication, and ongoing pursuit of truth and fulfillment. She had 3 marriages, to Peter Lindstrom, Roberto Rossellini, and Lars Schmidt, and each marriage formed a chapter in her life as a woman and as an artist. These marriages not only reflected the development of her career, but also the shifting social expectations of women during the 20th century. Her marriage to Peter Lindstrom, a Swedish neurosurgeon, was the first, and they were wed in 1937 when she was still in her 20s and first starting out in film. Lindstrom was a steady and intelligent man who provided Bergman with a sense of stability as she transitioned from her early Swedish films to international stardom. The couple had 1 daughter, Pia Lindstrom, born in 1938, who would later become a respected television journalist. In the early years of marriage, Ingrid and Peter enjoyed a comfortable and traditional existence, particularly after settling in the United States, when Bergman was signed to a Hollywood contract. When Bergman's reputation increased, her life became hectic with the schedules of acting and traveling, and Lindstrom's profession left him tied to the world of medicine. Their various ambitions and ways of life slowly drew them apart, and by the late 1940s, the marriage was slowly disintegrating under the pressure of distance and emotional distance. Their 1950 divorce was a turning point for Bergman both personally and professionally. Her second marriage, to Roberto Rossellini, the great Italian filmmaster, was one of the most intense and scandalous love affairs of Hollywood history. Bergman met Rossellini when she was looking for a new intellectual challenge, having written a letter to him confessing her love for his neo-realist works like Rome, Open City. Their encounter gave birth to a passionate romance that challenged convention and created a scandal that rocked the film world. Bergman was then still married to Lindstrom, and Rossellini was also married. When news broke that Bergman was pregnant with Rossellini's child, the American press and public reacted with outrage. Once celebrated as America's beloved screen goddess, Bergman was suddenly vilified and labeled immoral. The scandal led to her temporary exile from Hollywood, but in Europe, she and Rossellini embarked on a bold new artistic adventure. They collaborated in a series of films, Stromboli 1950, Europe 51 1952, and Journey to Italy 1954, which, though at the time mistaken, are now considered masterworks of emotional realism. Bergman and Rossellini had a son, Roberto, and twin daughters, Isabella and Isata. Their daughter Isabella would go on to become a celebrated actress and model, continuing her mother's tradition. However, the very intensity that had drawn Bergman and Rossellini together eventually drove them apart. By 1957, their marriage had deteriorated under creative tensions, cultural differences, and Rossellini's controlling nature. Their divorce marked the end of one of cinema's most famous and tumultuous love stories. In 1958, Ingrid Bergman wed Lars Schmidt, a Swedish theater producer who had her passion for the arts but provided calmer and more earthy workmate-like companionship. This third marriage occurred after years of crisis and public turmoil, an indication of Bergman's yearning for harmony and equilibrium. With Schmidt, she split her time between Europe and America, continuing to act in films, theater, and television, as well as have a more private domestic life. Schmidt encouraged her career, frequently accompanying her to film festivals and theater openings, but always giving her the kind of freedom that she required as an artist. Their marriage endured for nearly 2 decades, a testament to mutual respect and friendship, even when passion had waned. They eventually divorced in 1975, but unlike her previous separations, this one was amicable. Bergman and Schmidt remained close friends until her death, and he would later play a role in preserving her legacy through his archives and memoirs. When Ingrid Bergman's personal letter emerged years after her passing, she remade the public's perception of her, not just as a great actress, but as a very human woman who struggled with love, guilt, and the price of pursuing her heart. One of the most astonishing disclosures relating to this note was her humble admission of a profound, ardent romance she had with Gregory Peck, her co-star in Alfred Hitchcock's 1945 classic Spellbound. Though the world long suspected there was more than professional chemistry between them, Bergman's own words, and Peck's subsequent confession, depicted two individuals who discovered something potent, ephemeral, and indelible in one another during one of the most emotionally intense moments of their lives. Years later, Gregory Peck confessed what many had long suspected. During his marriage to Greta Kukkonen, he was involved in a fleeting but all-consuming affair with Bergman during the filming of Spellbound. In a 1987 People magazine interview, Peck replied candidly, "All I can say is that I had a real love for her, and I think that's where I ought to stop. I was young. She was young. We spent weeks in concentrated and intimate labor together." His words were a confession and a muted appeal for comprehension, an admission that their closeness had been born not of lewd design, but of deep connection forged in the heat of creative work. Bergman's note penned years after a lifetime of renown, sorrow, and redemption, was a testament to her residual thoughts regarding those days. Gregory was sweet, quiet, and powerful in a manner that intimidated me, she wrote. He made me think about what I desired in a man, but also what I could never hold on to. These passages showed that, in Bergman's view, the affair wasn't a mere casual dalliance, but an emotional turning point that haunted her in still moments. She recognized in Peck not just a co-star, but a reflection of her own desire for solidity and richness in a world that repeatedly asked her to perform, please, and step aside. In the spellbound production, the rapport between the two leads was palpable. Hitchcock, ever the astute student of human interaction, picked up on the spark and leveraged it for dramatic purposes, creating scenes imbued with tension and vulnerability. The movie's plot of a psychiatrist and an amnesia sufferer who fall in love amidst psychological turmoil became a haunting mirror image of their own lives. I believe I fell in love with the man in front of the camera and behind it, Bergman once admitted in another interview years later. Sometimes when you are pretending love, it becomes real before you know it. That line contained more truth than audiences ever could have imagined. To Peck, the affair was an ambivalent mixture of desire and shame. He was married with a young family and torn between obligation and passion. Bergman was also married to Dr. Peter Lindstrom at the time. But both were carried away by the power of the production and the emotional closeness that is possible with acting. In Bergman's letter, she said of the guilt she felt, "We told ourselves it was only acting, that what we felt was part of the film. But that was a lie. When I looked into his eyes, I forgot everything else. That frightened me more than anything." Once filming was finished, both actors resumed their lives. But their bond was remembered by them. Peck went on to establish one of Hollywood's most noted careers and eventually found real bliss with his second wife, Veronique Passani. Bergman, on the other hand, suffered public shame over her affair with Italian film director Roberto Rossellini, an affair that doomed her Hollywood career for some years. But the tone of her letter implied she remembered her time with Peck as something much more innocent, free from the judgment that eventually pursued her. "She was the most alive woman I ever knew," Peck once confided in a private conversation. As reported by friends, when Ingrid walked into a room, you could sense the air shift. For Bergman, Peck was a type of emotional refuge she seldom experienced in her life on the run. In her letter, she wrote, "If I had met Gregory at a different time, maybe all would have turned out differently. But life only offers us moments, never promises." Those brief moments, it seemed, left a lasting impression on both of us. The discovery of the note many years later recast what had been dismissed all along as a brief set romance into something far more meaningful. A small but potent attestation to two hearts that briefly bumped into each other in the midst of creativity and aspiration. It showed that Bergman, under the glamour and glory, was still sensitive, prone to deep emotion, and perpetually reflective about what she did. Ultimately, her words, "I never stopped being grateful for the kindness he showed me," resonated through the pages like a soft confession. They brought humanity to a woman who too often appeared only as a screen legend and reminded the world that even legends fall in love, stumble and fall, and leave behind truths too tender to voice out loud in their lifetime. The note transformed everything, not because it shocked the past, but because it revealed the heart of a woman who had the courage to love fully and live authentically, even when it cost her everything. Ingrid Bergman passed away in London on August 29, 1982, at midnight, her 67th birthday. She was with 3 friends and her former husband Lars Schmidt, having just had their last toast to her hours before. A paperback copy of The Little Prince rested on her bed, open to a page in the middle, a suitable companion for a woman who, even in death, continued to stretch toward the beauty and truth that had directed her life.